Welcome back to my channel, everybody. My name is Rick Bork. We're back to working on this 5.4 again. We'll call this part 2. This is the disassembly. The first thing we want to do is we want to take off the air intake part, the trim piece that goes over the top of the radiator, the fan shroud, miscellaneous things like that. We're not going to get too much into detail. I'll just kind of show you briefly as I take this stuff apart. We'll get into detail as I get down to the main engine parts of it. So I'm going to get to work on this and we'll touch base as we go. One thing you want to do, folks, before you go and take the belt and all that off, make sure you crack that fan loose first. And I have a pulley holding fixture, and it makes it easier. But when that belt's on there, that water pump's not freewheeling. Pretty easy. Just the spanner wrench and the fan wrench. Pop that thing loose before you get in there too far. You're going to want to drain the cooling system down on this far enough that you can remove this upper radiator hose. Really don't have to get invasive on the cooling system on this, but getting this upper hose out of the way is going to make things a lot easier. You can work around it if you have to, but draining the cooling system down just far enough to get this upper radiator hose off will make things a lot easier for you. Alright guys, as you can see, we've removed the fan shroud. Our next step is we're going to hop over here, we're going to hook up the AC machine, we're going to remove the battery, the PCM bracket, and then once the AC machine is done, we're going to remove the line that runs over the top of the valve cover to give us better access to removing that right hand valve cover. Alright, so now we've removed the battery, we've removed the PCM bracket. We also looped the belt off. We removed the pulleys on the front, the water pump pulley, the alternator can stay in place, AC compressor can stay in place. We're going to have to take the power steering pump off. We're going to have to take the front crank pulley off. Before we get to that, we're going to pull the wire harness back, disconnect all the electrical connectors, take the ignition coils out, and we're going to pull the valve covers off. So let's get to working on the valve covers. One thing you're going to want to do on these engines is you'll notice I took and put a rag on top of the throttle body. If you got access to compressed air, take and blow the top of this out where the valve cover meets the cylinder head and the intake manifold and all that. It's a good place for catching dirt. When you pop that valve cover loose, all that dirt's going to fall down inside that motor. So if you can take and blow that out of there with compressed air, it's just going to benefit you in the long run. So our next step is going to be pull that wire harness out of the way. We'll take all the 4 ignition coils on each side, free the push pins on this wire harness, and we can move that wire harness out of the way and unbolt the valve covers on each side. Now mind you, on the right side over here, once we go over to the right side, that's when we're going to have to disconnect that AC line. That's right here. We're going to have to take that AC line off because that elbow comes out and goes over the top of the valve cover. So we're going to start working on the left side first while the AC machine is still doing its thing. Alright, so we got our ignition coils out of the way. You can see our wire harness is loose. And now we got good access to getting this valve cover out of here. We're going to go ahead and take the valve cover bolts out. We'll get that first valve cover out of the way. And then I'll pop one bearing cap off. And I'll show you guys the scoring that's going on in there. And I'll show you why this is going to be kind of a gamble to fix this engine. But like I said, the parts to fix this engine were under $200, and I'm not paying a labor rate. It's just my own time. So let's get that valve cover off and I'll give you a look inside that engine. Alright, now you can see that we got the valve cover off. I'm going to reach in there, I'm going to pull one of these bearing caps out, and I'm going to show you why this engine, under normal circumstances, would not be repairable. Alright, so as you can see here, you can see all the scoring in there. It's starting to gull a little bit. This is the reason that your mechanic's going to come out and tell you that your engine's no good. Now, like I said, and I can't reiterate this enough times in this video, this is my truck. I bought it knowing this engine was in this condition, and I'm going to take a gamble on it. I'm going to put an oil pump in it. I'm going to put the timing components in it, and I know these bearings are a little bit scored up. They're a little rough. The cams are a little rough. Now, mind you, the left side on this engine is the first side to get oil. So if this side is scored, the right side's going to be worse. I can guarantee you that. But like I said, I knew it was this way, and I'm going to take a gamble on it. So when your mechanic tells you that they're not going to fix this engine for you, you have to understand where they're coming from and why they won't fix it for you. So I'm going to put this bearing cap back on. We're going to continue ripping and tearing on this thing. We're going to get the right side valve cover off. We're going to get the front cover off. And then we're going to take a look at the timing components that are in there. And we'll start getting a little bit more in depth on this video and showing you how I take this stuff apart, making sure that it's timed correctly and things like that. And then we'll jump over and do an assembly video. So let's go back to work on this. Alright folks, so now we got valve covers and everything off. We pulled the front crank pulley off, got the power steering pump out of the way. We are going to pop this front cover off, and we'll see what we got going on in here. I'm sure there's going to be broken guides in here. I'd be surprised if there's not. That's why we got an entire kit. So let's pop this cover off and see what we got going on. That's the tone ring for the crank sensor. Make sure you put this back in. If you don't put this back in, the engine won't start when you're done. So I always set this on top of the timing cover, that way, on top of the front cover, so that way I put it back on before I put the timing cover on. Let's take a look in here. So our bottom timing chain guide is busted. I'll get the camera and I'll show you that here in a second. I also noticed we got a lot of slop in that timing chain. So let me grab that camera and show you what we got going on. Alright, so as you can see in here, hopefully you can see that brake right here. You see where that guide's busted. There's a lot of play and everything. The tensioner should be holding that chain tight. It's not. It's just kind of flopping around in there. If we go over to this side's extremely loose. You can see that timing chain just flopping there. I don't see any busted guide on this side. This side looks like the guide's in good shape. Alright, so now I'm going to pull these timing components out of here. We want to roll this engine over and get our timing marks that are pretty well lined up right now. So what I like to do is zip the bolt back in the end of the crank here. Kind of zip it in there with an impact. That way you can use this that crank bolt to roll this engine over a little bit. Alright, so now we got the engine in approximately neutral position. This is the left hand side. You can see the timing mark right there. If the camera will focus. There's an L with an arrow pointing at it right there. If we come over to the right side, you can see this timing mark there. Notice there's a full tooth on each side of these. Same way on the left side. Now if we come down to the bottom one, I'm going to try to give you a view of that. There's that little hole in that little inset in the bottom of the crank sprocket right there. That lines up directly with one link on the chain. Okay, so now when we take this apart, you're going to want to keep that in mind, because the new chain is going to be marked. We want to keep this in approximately a neutral position. And mind you, when we take the timing chain off, the cam might pop back a little bit. It's not a big deal. As long as you're close, you're not going to ruin any valves. So we're going to take the rest of these timing components out of here, and I'll show you the broken stuff before we wrap up the disassembly video. And then we're going to jump over and make an assembly video. That way these don't get into being way too long of videos. So let's get back to work. Alright, so as we're taking timing components apart here, a couple of things I'm noticing. You'll see on these timing chain tensioners where the gaskets just... That's why we get new tensioners with them. Other thing I'm noticing is the amount of just sludge that's inside these tensioners. This engine's pretty dirty on the inside. So we're going to run some clean oil through it for a couple 100 miles and then change it, and probably do that in a process of 3 or 4 steps. I should say we'll do that 3 or 4 times to try to clean out some of the sludging that's in this engine. That's the old tensioner. We got a new one for it, so we can pitch this one. This is the old guide from the right side. I don't see much wrong with it other than it's starting to wear on the top edge a little bit. But again, we got a new one of those, so that one's going. We can loop this timing chain off here. And you can see the old wear marks on the timing chain. Now, one thing I didn't do is look at the back of the timing cover. We'll do that after we get these off here and see how much wear was on the back of the timing cover. Right now I'm taking the tensioner off the left side. We want to save the bolts because the kit doesn't come with new bolts for the tensioners. Again, you can see where that gasket's just blown out on that tensioner. Now this guide, this is the left side guide. This one's actually wore right through the face of it. The guide material, as you can see there, should be about that thick. Right in the center of that guide, it wore all the way through the face of that material. So that one's pretty well shot. timing chain. We got new ones. So as you can see here, this is one of the guides that's just busted in half. Each end was held in with a bolt, but there's no huge missing components. It did start chewing on the outside of this guide a little bit, but otherwise, we got a new one of those too. So that's the guide from the right side. I don't see any real problems with that. The next step here is going to be to zip this crank bolt back out, slide the sprocket off, and then we're going to take the oil pump out of here. The kit came with a new drive sprocket. Sometimes these get kind of wore. You can see where the chain wore into the face of it. It's not real smooth anymore. I'll give you a comparison here. The new one's nice and smooth. You can see where the teeth, the chain had worn into the face of those teeth. And they've actually worn them down pretty good. You can see a pretty significant difference there. So now we're going to get into the oil pump. The biggest thing you want to watch on this now is the bolts come in from the bottom on the pickup tube. They come into the bottom of the pump, and you have to take them out with an open-ended wrench. If you drop them, there's the potential for them to roll back in the oil pan and down into the sump, get picked up in the sump and block off your oil supply. So what I do is I take an open-end wrench and back that bolt way out, but I lay a magnet right underneath it, so that way if that bolt falls down, I can catch it with the magnet. Alright, so we just got a couple of components left here, folks. We're going to take this last cam phaser off, and we're going to pull the oil pump out. We already pulled the bolts out of the pickup tube and took the bolts out of the pump itself. One tool you're going to want to use for changing these cam phasers is this cam phaser holding tool. This is OTC number 3031046. Now if you can't get this tool, it's going to make the job significantly harder. But I think if you go online, you can order these, or you might be able to borrow one from a local repair shop if they have one. If you install this on here and it engages with the teeth on the cam phaser sprocket to hold it in place, that locks that in place. So when you go to break the bolt loose for the cam phaser sprocket, you don't have to worry about turning the cam and bending the valves and causing engine interference and things like that. Now the new cam phasers do come with new bolts, so you can throw the cam phaser and the bolt away. Our next step is going to be able to get that oil pump out of there. So now you want to push the oil pickup tube away from the oil pump and slide the oil pump off the crankshaft. Now you can see from that timing chain running loose, it actually started cutting into the face of the oil pump. That's how much slack was in that timing chain. It actually scored the face of the engine block and stuff like that in a couple of spots. Alright folks, so that pretty much wraps up the disassembly part of this video. We got in and I showed you the broken timing components, how to take most of this stuff apart, the scored cam bearings, things like that. Those are things you want to look for getting into this. Now keep in mind, if you take this to a repair shop, this should be a condemned engine. But this is my engine, and I'm gambling on this because it's my labor. I'm not paying thousands of dollars for a repair on this. I'm out a couple $100 if it doesn't work. So that's on me. So don't take this video to a repair shop and say he did it. Keep in mind, this is a gamble, and this is my gamble. I'm not gambling with customers' money and things like that. So in all rights, if this was a customer job, this truck needs an engine. But we're going to put a kit in it, and we're going to see what happens. So jump over and watch the assembly video. I do appreciate you guys watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time.